Bom, e começando o nosso seminário, eu vou apresentar a doutora Sheila Cosminsky, que vai fazer a nossa conferência principal. A doutora Sheila é professora emérita de Antropologia no Departamento de Sociologia, Antropologia e Justiça Criminal da Universidade de Nova Jersey e é coautora com Ira Harrison de 2 volumes bibliográficos sobre medicina tradicional. A gente agradece muito a doutora Sheila e fique à vontade para começar a sua palestra, doutora.
Okay. Thank you. It's been an honor to be here, and I've been learning a lot from the previous presentations. We're going to sort of switch from focusing on Brazil to Guatemala, and we can see some of the comparisons between the two, which actually are quite different, although many of the problems of birth and medicalization are the same. I'm going to examine the impact of medicalization by focusing on a mother who was a midwife and then her daughter who continued her practice over a period of 40 years so that we can see some of the changes through that comparison. I'm beginning with Guatemala. As some of you, I'm sure, know, had undergone a civil war during the 80s, and that was actually part of a previous war from 1952. But during the 80s was a very bad period, particularly for the indigenous populations and rural populations in general. The definition that I'm using here of medicalization or biomedicalization is where birth is viewed as a physiological, biological process, not spiritual, not social, whereas among the people, those are aspects of birth. Medicine defines pregnancy and birth as diseases, as what can go wrong is the emphasis, rather than a normal procedure. And medicalization is part of a larger globalization process. In Guatemala, the main mechanism by which the midwives become absorbed into and pulled into the medical profession is that, not profession, as medical essentially assistants, is through training programs offered by the government and or many non-governmental organizations, because they have to get a certificate in order to legally practice. So they are supposed to undergo these training programs, which then have review sessions monthly or sporadically, as may be the case. And the World Health Organization regards these traditional midwives as traditional birth attendants, TBA. All the literature from World Health Organization, from UNICEF, from the Agency of International Development in the States, regard them as, quote, TBAs, traditional birth attendants. That means it ignores social roles, ritual roles, and prenatal and postnatal care, and just focuses on, so it's a very short-sighted view of what the midwife does and who she is. As you get this process of medicalization, it becomes medicine becomes the authoritative knowledge, meaning the knowledge that counts. Anything else is sort of subordinate. It also is influenced by government health policies and regulations, and the influence of World Health Organization's U.S. Agency for International Development and other international agencies exert pressure on the policies that the government then enacts. And one of the recent changes of WHO, the World Health Organization, has sharply changed. Many of the midwifery training programs were supported and were a policy of the World Health Organization to try to, quote, upgrade the midwife's practice. And they sponsored training programs. They then decided, after the Millennial Development Goals, that the goals for maternal mortality and infant mortality had not been met. Therefore, there's nothing wrong with the policy, so they decided the training programs were not worth it. We need to have skilled birth attendants, meaning birth attendants that have some medical training, and forget about the traditional midwives. So they stopped supporting the training programs, which meant then the governments, like Guatemala, who, because of corruption and lag behind and all, still having some programs. But essentially, it really changed. And programs that organizations were sponsoring suddenly found funding cut off and everything. And the midwives who were in those programs also were, as well as the population. And so that has had a sharp impact with the pushing of what the World Health Organization calls, quote, skilled birth attendants. So this means trying to have the government and other organizations sponsor programs for younger women because they don't have the baggage that older women do, nor the knowledge. And many of these younger women also are not married or single, don't have children. But they give them a course geared toward practicing midwifery. And these newly trained people are supposed to be the eventual replacements because they've had some medical training. So what WHO means by skilled birth attendants is someone who has had some biomedical training for birth. Okay, what I want to do is show you a series of slides illustrating some of the aspects of birth in Guatemala. Let me see if I can. This is a map of Guatemala, and the areas. So there were two areas in Guatemala that I had worked. Initially, one was in this area where there's a very beautiful lake in the highlands. This is all indigenous area in the highlands. And the other was down here on a coffee and sugar plantation in the lowlands, which is where most of the slides you'll see of the mother-daughter midwives were. This is one of the sort of symbolic pictures of Guatemala, Lake Atitlan, which is, unfortunately, you can't see the volcano very well in the background, but is symbolic of all the tourist ads of Guatemala. This is the typical highland area. And as you can see, there's a lot of deforestation. And now that whole hillside really is bare because of the increased population density and nowhere to go. So there's increased erosion, et cetera. This area also was involved in the violence because the Pan American Highway goes through it, so the guerrillas came in thinking they could control the area, then the military came in full force. And it became, from 1980 to 85, a military base. This is a view from the plantation on the coast of one of the volcanoes overlooking the plantation area. This is the entryway to the plantation, which was growing sugar and coffee. And the women were the ones that tended the coffee. The men cut the sugar cane. And about 2003 or so, the plantation owners stopped growing coffee because there was increased competition. Oh, okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Oh, okay. Sorry. So the plantation owners stopped growing coffee because there was increased competition from Asia, from Indonesia, Vietnam, and also in Guatemala, the demand in terms of external shipping and price was for a higher grade coffee, which was grown in the highlands, did not grow well in the area where the plantation was. So he stopped growing coffee. Now, one of the implications of that was what women did, took care of coffee. So women were cut out suddenly of an income and much more dependent then on the male members of the household who were cutting the sugar. Okay, so this is the entryway. This is the office of the plantation. On the right-hand side, on the right-hand side, right next to that tree, is the plantation owner's house with a swimming pool. This is typical housing on part of the plantation. There are these long wooden houses that have been divided up, essentially 1 or 2 rooms per house. And not much privacy either. This is typical of the house. They're given rations of firewood. This is a woman planting beans. Men plant the corn, women plant the beans. And here she is carrying a child, and the other girl is putting the seeds into the holes that the mother makes. So it's a team effort, which no longer, well, they would get small plots of land from the plantation owner. Here's a woman picking coffee, and you can see the traditional way of carrying the infant. Sugar cane, which the men are cutting. Now, if you look at this picture, this is a small branch of a river that goes through the plantation. And you see there's washing clothes, washing dishes, and this little boy bathing. So everything was done in the river. Not too hygienic. Okay. There was a central watering place, fountain, and so often the younger girls in the family will go get the water and store them. There used to be clay jugs, now they're all plastic, which are easy to carry. Now the plantation owner did start putting in some sinks in front of certain houses, which they paid a small fee for. And that was a big change in terms of having not only a closer source of water, but also cleaner water. If you notice on the sink, it says, Dios es amor. That signifies she has changed to evangelicalism, which has been very strong in terms of inroads into the Catholic areas. But this was a big improvement for some of the people versus the Creek. This is a traditional midwife up in the Highlands, where I first worked. Maria Chavez, she was the oldest midwife there. One of the things in terms of field work is how much you can trust information that someone gives you. And so one of the problems often in trying to interview, say, the midwives, was they told you what they thought you wanted to hear. So that the traditional birth position was either kneeling or being supported by your husband and leaning back sort of on him. And as I'll show you, everything with the government training programs was you lie horizontal. So how do you know who's telling the truth? And what was interesting is that this midwife, who was very traditional, said if she lied, she would be punished by God. So it's interesting in that the most traditional actually were also the people that you could best trust the information from because of this midwife, the traditional midwife being regarded as a gift of God. It was a sacred position as well as a medical position. Now this is the midwife from the plantation, the older woman. She died probably around 2008. She had 12 children. She got married when she was 15. And she had, I think it was 3 deaths of children, and there were 12 that were living. She's extremely respected within the plantation and all the surrounding areas. This is her daughter who continued the practice after Doña Maria died. And she used to accompany her mother. Now, her mother was mixed Indian and what they call Ladino or non-Indian. But she married an Indian, which is surprising. And she had to learn the Indian language, in this case, Quiche, to talk to her husband's family, who used to make fun of her. And she would tell about her early years. And usually it's the opposite situation. You know, someone trying to learn Spanish rather than someone trying to learn one of the indigenous languages. This is Syriaca, her daughter, who, as I said, continued the practice. But whereas her mother had been, I'll use the term, traditionally selected, she had had a very serious illness with attacks, like epileptic attacks, paralyzed, and went to a healer, and he said that if she does not practice, this is one of the pathways both to healers, shamans, and midwives, was this gift of God, but it comes on, and you know it because you go through a serious illness. That's one of the hallmarks. So this healer said, unless you practice as a midwife, you will not get better. Someone else will get sick in your family, or you will die. So now Syriaca did not go through that. So the whole sort of idea of it being a sacred calling wasn't as strong, but she said when she goes see a patient and massages, it's God that works through her hands. So she still regards it as a sacred profession, but not like her mother, who would hear the voices of spirit midwives guiding her. And she said, I don't believe in what my mother is, but God guides my hands. So you still get an emphasis on the midwife as a spiritual and sacred calling, although it's diluted in a way or not as strong. That's Syriaca and myself. This was Maria. This is two of her daughters who she has delivered their children. So those are her grandchildren. And the others are grandchildren too. One of the hallmarks of the midwife's practice is the massage. And the massage starts during the prenatal visits. Part of it is examining the development of the child and how to see the position. And at the same time, she massages her gently, and she puts warmed oil on her hands so that they will be smooth over the baby. And at the same time, she's feeling the position. But in their view, it's not only helping relax the mother and make the mother feel better, but also the fetus feels the effect of the massage. Okay. Before I get to this, one of the problems that the midwives face is that the doctors are constantly telling them, do not massage the woman. Because traditionally, if the baby is in a bad position, the midwife can change it with the massage in terms of movements. And according to the medical profession, this is dangerous. So, therefore, you shouldn't massage at all. Yeah. There's that lack, that mistrust. So it's not only in the training programs or when they do have to take someone to the hospital, that there's this condescension and don't messages from the doctors and nurses, but it goes much deeper in terms of the attitudes of condescension toward the midwives. And that, of course, does not help learning either. Okay, now one of the things that she's doing here is she warms some oil on her hands so they'll be smooth and heated, because you don't want it to be cold, your hands to be cold, and is massaging the woman as she also has felt the position of the infant. Here is Syriaca showing me how to measure the age of the fetus. Now, it's interesting, I have another picture, which I don't think I can get on here, that was from another area and another training program, showing the midwife with a measuring tape to measure the height of the abdomen. There's a very, very wide difference in terms of these training programs, whether they're the government or one of the non-governmental organizations, who are usually more positive in terms of what they can what they expect the midwife can do. So elsewhere, they have a measuring tape, which doesn't require much expense or effort to teach in terms of measuring the height of the abdominal area. But Syriaca doesn't have that, and the government training program didn't give her a measuring tape. So she does it manually. And here she's showing me to see where the head and the feet are, as well as the extent of the development of the fetus. There were several examples of women who had gone to the prenatal clinic, had been told that they had to have a cesarean because of the position of the baby, that it was malpositioned. The local health centers and clinics do not have ultrasound. You have to go to certain health centers or the hospital or a private place to get an ultrasound. So they are told what the position of the baby is by the nurse in the clinic, and saying you need to have a cesarean. In contrast to Brazil, women are petrified of the knife and the cesareans. And they feel that the doctors are pushing it to, one, give new doctors practice, because medical students have to practice in rural areas for 2 years. It's one way of getting medical care to the rural areas. So they feel that they're pushing cesareans in the hospital to give these doctors, or future doctors, practice, or it's because they get more money for a cesarean. So in contrast to here, people are very reluctant and negative about getting a cesarean. Unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to be able to I can't get the link to the movie, which was showing how she was massaging. This is the traditional position for birth, or one of the traditional positions, is kneeling. And as you see, she's actually fully clothed, and the midwife catches the baby from underneath, or helps pull it out from underneath. This, of course, is talked against and preached against by the medical profession. And one of the problems is that there's an outdated form of biomedicine that's taught in these training courses. So that, for instance, Syriaca was told she had to deliver the babies lying down. And if she did not, if anything happened, she would be held responsible for whatever happened to the mother. So there was tremendous pressure then, and Syriaca, in contrast to her mother, has everyone lie down. Her mother lets the woman try whatever feels good for her. She may ask her to lie down, it may not work. In this case, she has her kneeling, which was the traditional position. If the husband is present, he will support the woman from behind while she sort of leans against him. So you have a semi-vertical position, and that's a common traditional position too. After these midwives like Syriaca being told she has to have the woman lie down, in 2013 I attended a training session for the midwives, and lo and behold, suddenly they started talking about the position vertical, the vertical position. That there was a sudden realization in the medical profession that, gee, this position actually has advantages. And so after, telling them they must use the horizontal position, suddenly now there's a recognition that the vertical position or any vertical position is beneficial. After the birth, they tie an abdominal binder, which they believe that the bones in the uterus and the pelvis open when the baby comes out, so you have to have a binder to push them and hold them together. And again, this is something that used to be practiced in the States long ago and now isn't. What the women say, if they don't have the binder, they feel loose inside. They don't feel good. So here's Maria tying the abdominal binder on. Okay, now, one of the things you see here is prenatal, the birth, and postnatal. In other words, the whole range that the midwife does, not just the birth, not just as WHO says, a traditional birth attendant. That's the TBA that WHO calls these midwives. Now, she has a candle there. And the traditional way when they cut the cord is to cauterize it. And what that does is it sanitizes it, it's clean and dry. What are they taught to do? They're taught you cut it with a scissors or a razor blade, which is supposedly sterile, but how many of the scissors they use are actually sterile is very questionable. And then you put alcohol and talcum powder. So what we see here, and this again is a common thing of the synchronization, the synthesis of the traditional and the modern. She used the candle, and then she has a bottle of alcohol, talcum powder, everything that she was told to use by the training course. And unfortunately, it's not clear here, but Syriaca is continuing the same thing. She has been told, do not use a candle. Why shouldn't you use a candle? The wax may drip and burn the baby. How often that happens? So what she does is she takes a piece of cloth, puts it underneath the cord on top of the baby, and then burns it. So if any wax would drip, it would drip on the cloth. So you get this innovation as well as the syncretism of the different methods, the modern and the traditional. So we can see how the midwives are different ways that they are adapting in terms of their own practices. Okay, so part of the postnatal treatment is a bath or several baths. In the Highlands, they use a sweat bath, which is like a sauna. And it's like a hut, and there's stones, and she lights a fire under the stones that heat it, and then she throws water on it that creates the steam. And so she bathes, rubs the woman, often with certain herbs, in this sweat bath. Now, what do doctors say about this? No, no, no. Why? Because you may overheat the woman and dehydrate her. And so it's dangerous. Again, how often that happens, we don't really know, or if it happens. One of the supporting statements that Doña Maria made in one of the training sessions I heard, where they mentioned about the sweat bath. And on the plantation, or in the hot areas, they don't use the sweat bath. I'll show you, they use water. But she said she had heard of an incident where the heat was so strong, and they're concerned that the woman would dehydrate, but in this case, the midwife fainted. So I don't know how often that may occur, but that was one of Doña Maria's stories. This is the inside of the sweat bath. There's a bench there, a plank. You saw the fire, where the fire was made on the side, and they throw the water. And then there's water there that the midwife also bathes the woman with. There are certain herbs over here that she will use also. Now, on the plantation, Maria and then Syriaca don't use the sweat bath. They give the woman a hot bath. First, on the third day, and what they regard as extremely important is heating the breasts to heat the milk. One of the basic underlying principles in the local system of medicine, the ethnomedicine, is the belief in the hot-cold dichotomy or continuum, which comes from the Spanish. I don't know if it's extensive in Brazil at all, but it came over with the Spanish. Some people argue there were pre-Columbian versions among the Aztecs and the Mayans. But it runs very, very strong, and it's one of the basic ethnomedical principles. And part of the rejection or acceptance of some of the modern practices has to do with whether it conflicts or can be supported within that principle. So here she has herbs that are hot, have been heated in hot water, that she puts in what are regarded as openings of the body. So she's sitting on a pile of herbs. She has them within her sort of slip. I don't know if you can see it, but where she's, here she's rubbing her knees. Knees are regarded as a point of entry of aire or cold air. So she's heating the heels, the bottom of the feet, the knees, the vaginal area, and rubbing the breasts. These are all, the breasts particularly to heat the milk, which otherwise would be too cold in terms of quality and make the baby sick. here she's massaging the breasts of the woman with a handful of these. Again, the herbs are also a hot quality in terms of the postnatal bath. One of the things that Syriaca's been told by one of the doctors is she should not use hot water, she should use warm water. There tends to be, from my point of view, from some of the physicians, the need to criticize or to comment, even when it's something not really that important. But there seems to be this feeling they have to say something in terms of criticizing the practices. I don't think it's conscious necessarily, but it has to do with the power differences. Okay, now, here she's rubbing, again, massaging the breasts. One of the interesting things is, and this affects hospital births, is the very, very strong value on modesty and shame. And some of the women who eventually go to the hospital because of, some particular reason, feel very uncomfortable. There are cases who told me that the women delivered or had the baby under the sheets. It was at night. They did not call anyone because of vergüenza or this modesty. And the nurse would come in and find the baby born and start yelling at the mother. But it's just a very strongly ingrained feeling about modesty and shame. So the shame and the modesty here is the bottom part. She's taking the bath with a slip on. It's not the top because they breastfeed in public. But the modesty has to do really with the bottom part, and that then gets carried into the hospital if they go to the hospital. And it presents conflicts in the hospital in terms of their relationship with the doctor or nurse. Okay, that was Doña Maria. This is Doña Syriaca. Again, taking this handful of herbs and massaging the breast so that the milk will be, quote, heated and come in. And again, you see, these herbs are also of hot quality. And then she has herbs down below under the slip. And in each of these cases, you saw the woman is wearing the slip because that's where the modesty value comes in terms of the lower part of the body. Massage also, Syriaca massages the legs. This is postnatally, and this is supposed to, again, prevent cramping from the legs, as she says, and helps the circulation. So she's going down toward the uterus area. This is a training course by one of the government. There's Maria. Maria. Here. And I want you to look at the conditions. The room that this was supposed to be, and this is in the local national hospital department, was locked. So they found this other room. So some of them have benches. You see some standing. And there are women outside because there was no room for them. This is not what you would call an ideal learning environment. I am sure if these were males, they would have found some place for them to meet. Okay, what we have here is the women being taught to wash their hands thoroughly. And how to wash them with just a little amount of water, since water in many of the houses is scarce. And so they had people come up, and then they asked the midwives to criticize or to comment on them. In local practice, you do not criticize someone openly, which would then cause them shame. So here she's showing her how to wash her hands, and she's demonstrating it. And then after she finished, they said, well, ask the rest of the midwives what was. But as I said, in their system of values, open criticism like that would cause a lot of shame to the person being criticized. So there is also this whole lack of knowledge repeatedly by the nurses and the medical profession of the local values. The other thing that the midwives objected to in this type of situation was there's a very strong patronizing tone when they are given these talks or lectures. And the midwives sense that and resent it. They feel like they're being treated like children. And the nurses, of course, are oblivious to this. One of the things that the midwives do, here we've been talking about the postpartum in terms of the bathing, is also infant illnesses. And these infant illnesses may be different than ours. In this case, I don't know if you have it here, you probably have a version of it, the fallen fontanelle, caída de mollero in Spanish, that it's believed that the fontanelle, which is soft in the babies, falls, and then the palate falls and causes the baby to have trouble nursing. Okay, so their solution is pushing up on the palate inside and clearing any phlegm or stuff from the throat, and sometimes sucking on the top as if to raise, but particularly the clearing of the throat. And that's what she's doing here. So we go, again, the midwife is dealing from the prenatal, postpartum, and then the children, the infants. So it's not just the birth. You have this role going through the whole cycle. And here's her daughter, Syriaca, doing the same thing. You see her putting her finger in the mouth and trying to get out, push on the palate and get at whatever saliva or anything may be there. So you get this emphasis also then on the postpartum and the children. Okay, that's it. Okay, so, okay, now two of the important principles that guide what the midwives accept or reject are what I consider two of the basic principles of the ethno-medical system. One mentioned the hot-cold division of the states of the body, and this balance of opposites. So if you are considered in a too hot state, you get something that the quality, it may not be temperature, but everything is classified in degrees of hotness and coldness. So you have a plant, and whether the plant is cold or been heated, it doesn't matter. It's the quality, the inherent quality of the plant as to its hot or coldness. The other is emotions. Strong emotions can cause illness. So that If a woman is frightened during pregnancy, it can cause either a miscarriage or a premature birth. If she has a fight with her husband and is either upset or angry, that can affect the pregnancy. So there's a whole range of emotions that affect the pregnancy that is part of their belief system. And these also guide what is accepted or rejected from modern medicine. If it goes against one of these basic principles, the tendency will be to reject it. If it supports or can be synthesized with it, it will be accepted. Now, if we look at the dependency on what's happened with the medical system, Syriaca, the daughter, has been under much more pressure to change and accept parts of modern medicine than her mother. And part of this are, one, the government restrictions and the power of the physician. And there's this whole issue of power, which we haven't really addressed much, but I think is really critical in terms of the doctor-patient relationships. Now, Syriaca will make statements saying, the doctor said, I should do such and such. The doctor prohibits such and such. I mean, these aren't things that we are really used to, but she will be, to hear her say some of these, particularly the doctor prohibits, and she goes to the doctor to validate some of her actions or conditions of the, if there's a problem with the mother, she will go to the doctor to try to explain so that he will validate that she's not responsible. So there's that increasing dependency, really, also on the authority of the doctor. So she faces much more pressure than her mother did. And she's more dependent on the biomedical system and the power of the doctor through the power of the state. The government has increased the restrictions that the midwife has to follow. She is not supposed to attend a new mother. She's supposed to refer a new mother to the hospital. She can lose her license if anything happens to that mother if she does not refer her. If a woman is too young, say 15, or too old, over 35, or has had several children, she is supposed to refer that woman to the hospital. And these are now government restrictions. The government is in shambles, so it probably would not be enforced. But these are official government restrictions. If the woman has had a previous cesarean, she should not deliver the baby. She should refer her. If there had been any complications before in terms of birth, she should refer her. And these also reflect not only changes in terms of the government restrictions, but the World Health Organization, who has changed their policies to no longer supporting midwifery training programs, but to support what they call skilled attendants. The rationale for this was that you had these millennial development goals set by the World Health Organization to reduce maternal mortality rates by a certain amount, to reduce infant mortality rates by a certain amount, by, I forgot what year, but lo and behold, they weren't met. So therefore, the problem is the midwives. That's the reason they were not met. It wasn't because of poverty. It wasn't because of the poor quality of the training programs. or the medical system, the public health system in Guatemala is in shambles. Even the hospital has problems getting medications because of the corruption. Those aren't the problems. The problems are the midwives. So therefore, we are no longer supporting training programs for midwives. We are supporting skilled attendants, skilled birth attendants. And what does skilled mean? Medically trained. So they are starting programs with young women, giving them some background in obstetrics, and they're going to be the assistants now rather than the traditional midwives who they want to phase out. One of the problems also, even with the training programs, was training the midwives on emergency measures. Any emergency, they say that the woman has preeclampsia, she gets about to deliver, and there are problems. We go to the hospital. Well, there's a problem of transport. There's a problem of the rest of the family, etc. But what they don't do then is teach the midwife what to do in the meantime. Say she's waiting for transport or something. There are measures they could take to try to allay the effects of those problems, particularly things like hemorrhaging, which is one of the most common problems. But they just say, refer to the hospital. Well, what do you do meanwhile? Particularly if it's an hour by bus or you can't get transportation to the hospital. So one of the suggestions I think that should be made is, in terms of giving the midwife some background in these various types of emergency measures. One of the ways that some groups are trying to address some of the problems is by developing birth centers, Casa Maternas. In Guatemala, outside of the city capital, the majority of births are still in the home. In the village up in the highlands where I'd worked, it is still something like 93% are in the home as of 2013 in the census. And part of that is not only the desire to have the midwives use it, but also logistically getting to the local district hospitals. Also, one of the things that is a problem is when they keep telling the midwives to refer people to the hospital and the government making all these new restrictions, is there are no new hospitals built. The existing figure that's been given for the last several years is the existing national hospitals, one in each of the departments, can handle 20% of the births. So what happens then if suddenly everyone's referred to the hospital? A lot of problems, right? So that situation has to be dealt with. As one of the interim, or one of the solutions, various organizations, including the government, have been building what they call Casa Maternas, maternity homes that are for waiting. The government has some of these, and they are built next to hospitals. So when it gets near the time, the woman can go to one of these Casas Maternas and wait, and then when it comes time for the delivery, she can go to the hospital because it's near. Other groups, some of the non-governmental organizations, and some midwifery groups that have been organized have also built these maternity homes. The advantage when they're able to do that, often again with the help of a non-governmental organization, is that they are in charge. The midwives run it. When it's done by the government, they don't really let the midwives. Even in the hospitals, when Syriaca refers someone, takes her to the hospital, the door is then closed to her. The woman goes in alone, and the door is shut in her face. Not all the national hospitals are the same, but the district hospital where I was, that was the practice. Here we have, for ages, been taught and practiced about the importance of a companion. In the local district hospital in Metel-Leo, the women can't have visitors, which goes beyond what everything we have been taught. So anyway, where you get these maternity homes that are organized by the midwives, often with the assistance of a non-governmental organization, are being presented as an alternative so that you can get some of the sanitary, there are problems with sanitation in many of the homes, so the maternity houses are clean, sanitary, and those that let the midwives run it or deliver in it are one of the alternative solutions now. But there are very few of them. If it's a government one, it's built next to the hospital. It's a waiting place, and when the woman's time to deliver, she goes into the hospital. So you have differences among these birth houses. Basically, what is needed is really a two-way communication. The training programs are just really one way. Nothing is good. There's this general attitude by the medical profession that whatever the midwife's doing isn't good. And that seems to be their basic assumption. Despite the fact that, as I said, there is no way that Guatemala can handle births if everyone delivers it, because there's 20% of births can be handled by the existing hospitals. There have been private hospitals built, but there have been no new national hospitals. So rather than denigrate the practices and knowledge that the midwives have in these programs, the training programs, and blaming them, like World Health Organization does, for high mortality rates, they should examine the training programs, not cut them out, revise them, and also look at the structural factors that affect poverty, transportation, diet, nutrition. There's tremendous malnutrition problems in Guatemala. And so the structural problems really need to be addressed. I will close now and leave you with that thought, which I think is applicable to many countries, including Brazil, that the structural problems have to be addressed. When we were talking before, even with the cesareans, it's not just the doctors or the women. There are larger issues that need to be addressed in terms of the system. Okay, thank you. I don't know. I have a brief video. I don't know whether there's any time for it.
Bom, eu gostaria de agradecer a palestra da professora e como nós mudamos um pouco a dinâmica do nosso encontro, fazendo o café da manhã mais cedo, a gente tem tempo para algumas perguntas. Assim, vocês poderiam fazer algumas perguntas e a doutora responder, ok? Mas acho que por problemas técnicos não poderia passar. Mas a gente pode ver se dá para passar à tarde, alguma coisa assim.
Okay.
Em português e traduz? Olá, bom dia, meu nome é Olívia. Eu gostaria de fazer uma breve pergunta. Você mencionou que as parteiras, em geral, diziam o que achavam que você gostaria de ouvir. E eu gostaria de saber como é que você fez para sair dessa situação, né? De que maneira você conseguiu driblar essa situação. Obrigada.
Well, for instance, one of the midwives who would say she gave birth lying down, had the women lie down. If you asked the women would say they gave birth kneeling. So that was one of the countermeasures in terms of. Also, for instance, one of the midwives, this wasn't on the plantation, this was in the Highlands, part of it was living there that you got to know people. Now, one of the midwives who was not from the village but had some clients there got very defensive and wanted to know why I was asking these questions. She had the training, blah, 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 blah. And someone else said because I was studying these, there wasn't testing her. So there was that aspect too. On the plantation with Marie and Syriaca, since I worked there for a long time over the years, you developed their confidence. And also because you knew you were visiting the other families and living there. So in part, it was something you couldn't do immediately. You really had to get their confidence. And as I said, this one woman one midwife who was not from the particular areas working in, but from outside, but had some clients, really was, as I said, perhaps the only one that really got defensive. And then someone else was explaining to her, I'm not testing her, that I just want to know. So you have to sort of sense it and be aware of, and their actions as well as the tone of voice, and things like that will sometimes give you hints of what, whether it's the truth or not. But in general, it wasn't a problem, and that was really because of the time factor. It wasn't something you went in and immediately started asking questions.
Bom dia, meu nome é Luanda. Você falou...
Okay.
Bom dia, meu nome é Luanda. Você falou sobre um sincretismo que elas fizeram entre algumas técnicas tradicionais e as novas técnicas apresentadas. Eu não sei se é uma pergunta muito difícil, mas você acha que esse sincretismo, né? Você observou que esse sincretismo ele se dava por uma crença mesmo na efetividade dessas novas práticas ou mais por uma aceitação delas, né? Enquanto essas... para que elas continuassem praticando, elas absorverem novas práticas para ampliar a sua aceitação. Obrigada.
It's an interesting question. In many cases, it was a voluntary, In other words, they saw certain advantages in the new techniques, but also in the old techniques. In other, so I think in terms of other cases, it may be pressure. So in the case of the cutting the cord, the continuation of the use of the candle, but also using either the scissors or razor, I think you got that combination. The pressure to use the scissors or razor, but feeling and believing in her own use of the candle. In other situations, I'm trying to think of, in other areas, not where I was working, but other programs, the training programs, which were by different organizations. One was Saving Mothers, which is based in the States. They taught the women to use blood pressure cuffs and gave them the blood pressure cuffs in the midwifery kit that you get at the end of the course. Where I was working, they've never taught them anything about blood pressure. And the nurse, and this was the last training program I saw, tells the midwives to take the blood pressure of the women, unaware that they don't have the blood pressure cuffs, they've never been used to it. And those women, those midwives would be delighted to have the cuffs. There are certain things like that that they feel would be useful and important and accept without tossing out their own. And so there's a short-sightedness of the medical system. Another one was using a tape measure to measure the height. Syriaca's never been given a tape measure or told to buy one. One of the other training programs from one of the other organizations shows, that they've given them the tape in their midwifery kit, and they use it. So, and she also might massage, or feel the woman in terms of the manual. So, okay, thank you.
Bom dia, meu nome é Camila, estou aqui. Oi. Eu sou de Pernambuco, no Nordeste, do Brasil, e também estudo sobre a assistência ao parto. E na sua fala, eu fiquei curiosa para saber se a senhora diferenciou os programas de treinamento do governo e das organizações não governamentais. E me parece que, normalmente, sempre de um conhecimento estrangeiro, no sentido cultural mesmo, assim, o conhecimento médico do outro, repassado para elas. No não governamental, talvez menos. Mas a minha curiosidade era para saber se existia também uma sistematização do próprio saber delas, que, dependendo da região, pudesse ser diferente. A senhora falou mesmo que tem uma diferença entre as terras altas das outras. Uhum. Então, se também havia uma vontade de sistematizar o próprio conhecimento local, porque a gente tem algumas... O curso que eu acompanhei era inverso. A lógica era biomédica para um atendimento do parto domiciliar. Contudo, o curso levou parteiras para ensinar as enfermeiras obstetras como que elas atuavam. Claro que isso era uma parte pequena do curso, mas ainda assim havia essa troca do conhecimento local com outras formas de saber. Né? Então, eu fiquei curiosa para saber. E aí, a Elaine também, que está aqui do lado, está fazendo o inventário das parteiras. Então, a gente tem aqui estamos, né, tentando fazer uma sistematização de alguns saberes locais para que isso também possa ser fortalecido, talvez. E aí fiquei curiosa para saber se esses treinamentos lá também podem partir, ou as associações de parteiras, se elas tentam fazer isso também, partir do conhecimento local.
Thank you. That's I think a very good question. In Guatemala, one of the problems is the ethnic relations between the indigenous and rural poor and what are called Ladinos or non-Indias in Guatemala. And there's a very, very strong bias against both the indigenous and the rural poor, who often are mixed. So the medical profession and people giving these courses have those, I think, underlying biases. The non-governmental organizations, who are often from other countries, United States, Norway, Germany, particularly the United States, but don't have those same biases. And so in terms of the two-way communication, they're, I think, more open. Also, several of the programs are training midwives to train midwives. That probably would be unheard of as a government program. So they'll train, the NGO will train a group of midwives, and that group will train other local midwives and carry on. One of the Casa Maternas, the maternity homes, is organized by one of these groups of midwives, of traditional midwives. And that's very different from one that is established by, say, the government. But I think in the training programs, that's where the outsiders have, I mean, we have their own biases, but they don't have as much of the built-in ethnic discrimination that I think many of the medical staff does. So I don't know if that answers your question. But one of the exciting things is the midwifery training programs that are now teaching other midwives, which, you know, as I said, sometimes gets outside support from an NGO, but they meet the government requirements. The non-governmental organization has to have an agreement by the government, but, you know, the government is in such a mess that yes, yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Então, eu vou fazer um comentário. Sheila, quando você começa a sua apresentação falando o que é o parto, o que não é o parto medicalizado, né? É quando ele é fisiológico, ele é afetivo, ele é social. Acho que a gente tem uma proposta importante também para a gente pensar, né, outras formas dessa medicalização. E quando a gente está neste debate, pensando essa medicalização do parto, o que você traz para a gente é essa circulação, né, de saberes em vias, né, que não tem mão dupla, mas ela tem múltiplos sentidos, né, e que ajudam a gente a pensar que esse conhecimento autoritativo, como você apresenta, né, da lógica biomédica, ele não pode ser o único saber sobre o parto, né? E eu acho que você traz isso para a gente de modo bastante concreto, né, a partir dessa experiência na Guatemala. Eu acho que a gente também pode pensar, né, claro que aqui localmente, que outros saberes a gente está interagindo. E eu acho que de uma forma também bastante interessante você fala como que há uma articulação, né, talvez assim como alguns autores também já disseram, dessa acomodação mútua entre saberes para produzir até um novo saber, né? E eu acho que é disso que a gente fala quando a gente pretende refletir sobre esse processo da medicalização do parto. Obrigada.
Thank you. I just wanted to make one comment in terms of this, which I appreciate. Thank you. The whole area of medicinal plants. The government programs are constantly telling them do not use herbs. And they mention specifically one herb which is very commonly used. The programs that are by the midwives or non-governmental organizations have, in some cases, planted and supported medicinal plant gardens, the knowledge of the women to pass on these medicinal plants. And so there's a very big gap in terms of this automatic negative attitude of the government programs and the government and the medical profession toward plants versus many of these local. And in fact, Syriaca has a lot of knowledge of plants, some passed on by her mother, but there was an NGO, a Guatemalan one, that was giving a course for midwives on plants, and she traveled and went to that program. But constantly you hear the doctors and the nurses saying, do not use medicinal plants. And that's one area of knowledge that, I think is really important. Thank you.
Mais uma vez, obrigado, doutora Sheila. Agora vamos fazer essa mesa para passar para outra mesa de apresentação. Obrigado.